Hello, Christine. My name is Allison White, and yes, I'm here with Christine Vachon, who is a prolific producer of many films and television content. Um, Her list of credits is very long, but to name a few, I will say Boys Don't Cry, Kids, Mildred Pierce, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, This Close, Far From Heaven, Carol, Shirley, just to name a few. So welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
So to get right into it, I would love to hear about your start in the industry itself and kind of how you came to discover you wanted to produce specifically.
Well, I started working, really as a PA in the mid '80s in New York City, when a lot of filmmakers were starting to make their first films. People like Spike Lee and Jim Jarmusch and Betty Gordon, Julie Dash, to name a few. So there was production happening in New York that wasn't like Hollywood production necessarily, but there was a core group of people who were getting things made, etc. While I was on those sets and did a lot of different types of jobs, I guess the movie that really influenced me the most that I worked on was a film called Parting Glances that Bill Sherwood directed. It was one of the sort of pioneers of what we call, queer cinema, gay cinema, whatever, you want to call it. What was fascinating to me about it was up until that point, I had really thought there was two types of cinema. There was very experimental, movies that were a true alternative to Hollywood. And then there was Hollywood movies, and a lot of those felt kind of radical and amazing in their own right, like, early Scorsese or Paul Schrader, et cetera, or Coppola, but they were very, very produced. When I saw Bill Sherwood's, when I worked on his movie, I realized that he was telling a very personal story, but that he was telling it in a way that was very familiar to audiences. And it kind of was a little bit of a light bulb that went off in my head. Like, I think these are the kind of movies I want to make. And as far as producing, once I started working on film sets, I sort of got the sense of what a producer actually did. Up until that point, I didn't know. I think most people don't know. I mean, it's a question I get asked all the time, like almost apologetically, like, do you mind if I ask like what it is you do exactly? But I saw that there was somebody who sort of had big picture in their mind at all times. And there was something really appealing about that to me, So, I mean, that's sort of a broad question. How did I actually physically get into producing? It was really, Todd Haynes made a movie called Superstar, the Karen Carpenter Story. It was his thesis film when he was getting an MFA, which he never actually finished at Bard College. It told the story of Karen Carpenter, the singer, and it used Barbie dolls. It is an extraordinary film. It's about 40 minutes long. It has been banned. It pops up on YouTube constantly. So anybody who's listening to this should go find it. It's kind of like whack-a-mole. It comes up, it gets taken down, then it comes up again. And that film, again, was so beautifully rendered and provocative and original, but also entertaining. And I thought, I gotta make sure this guy doesn't do another movie that doesn't have my name on it. And so far, knock wood, he has not. So anyway, that's the short version.
Yeah, I mean, well, you and Todd have worked together so much since. So, well, so when people do ask you, what does a producer do? What do you say?
I say, we're kind of the engine on the train. I mean, I think it's what's puzzling to people, and I totally get it, is, you know, you when you see the credits on a film, there's executive producers, there's associate producers, there's co-producers, there's line producers, there's producers, and there's tons of them often. I mean, sometimes, you know, you look at, I think like Chicago 7, for example, has something like at least 15 people that have some form of a producer credit. So, you know, the hard thing is like, you know, if a financier comes to me and says, I want to give you 50% of your budget, but in exchange, I want to share the director credit, right? Your answer is no, of course you can't do that. I mean, directors are protected by their guild or their union, etc. But if that same financier comes and says, I want to put up 50% of your budget and I want a producer credit, the response usually is, okay.
No problem.
And I'm not even saying that that's the wrong response. I'm just saying that's what, you know, really parsing out who does what can get very complicated. But that's not answering the question. What a producer does is, you know, it's soup to nuts. Find material. Attach a writer if there isn't one attached already. Attach a director if there isn't one attached already. Develop that material into something that you can then package. Packaging means attaching the creative elements that make it marketable. Actors, heads of department, the director, etc. Then taking that package and taking it to market and figuring out the best way to get it financed, and then actually mounting it once the financing is in place. And again, all the while being the one who's always thinking a little ahead, trying to get a sense of the challenges at all time. Once it's actually done and through post-production, often it goes through various marketing tests, focus groups, things like that. And then getting it out into the world and still being, you know, the point person or one of the point people about how it is going out into the world. Was there a decision to sell it to a streamer or, you know, a theatrical distributors exist anymore? You know, all of those things, how to protect the investment of the investors. So
it's a lot.
It's a lot.
So when you started producing, it was probably the early 90s, I guess, or late 80s.
Yes.
And so what, like, I mean, producers do so much, but when you started, what did your day look like? I mean, obviously when you, like on Poison, you were the first AD as well. So like you were doing whatever it took, but how does that differ? Like what did your days look like then?
I mean, I think back then, for several reasons. I mean, partly because we were very young, you know, we worked insane hours, but also movies shot frequently, you know, 16, 17 hours a day, which we really don't, you know, is not encouraged anymore, nor should it be. So it's a little bit the Wild West. You know, the real turning point for me came, we did Todd Haynes's film Poison, then we did Swoon, we did Go Fish, and then we had a year of production, and Safe was in there somewhere. But then we had a year of production of 3 movies in a row, where we worked out of the same production office with essentially the same team. And part of the team was my line producer, Pam Coughlin. 3 movies were Kids, Stonewall, and I Shot Andy Warhol, but I'm not sure that's the order. I can't remember.
Right.
But, so that year gave us a kind of stability where we actually started to develop projects, which hadn't really occurred to us before.
Right.
So for example, we started to develop Boys Don't Cry, which didn't shoot for like another 7 years, but we started to work with the filmmaker and look at drafts of the script, which again, just wasn't something we'd ever really had the luxury to do. It also allowed Pam and I to understand, it gave Pam and I the opportunity to really learn how to work together and realize that our relationship was a rare gift and we needed to keep it going.
Hmm. And so that was, I guess, in '95 you formed Killer Films.
Is it?
Or
Yeah.
that's what the internet tells me. But when you formed Killer Films, what were you trying to do? And like, Killer's obviously been so successful in terms of a variety of different things. What do you attribute to that? And what were your like goals back then?
I mean, I think our goals back then were we had really created, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, but I mean, the other production companies in New York City were incredibly male driven. And the fact that we were, two women at the top, um, it created a different kind of culture. Like it was almost like we could create a culture the way we wanted to, and we didn't. It afforded us a tremendous amount of freedom, and a tremendous amount of emotional freedom. I mean,
Hmm.
I still dealt with the same, bullshit that a lot of people dealt with because the rest of the film world was not by any
Yeah.
means female driven, but our little corner, our little killer corner was. Um, so I think our goals were really like we really like working together, and we want to figure out a way to create some kind of longevity in our careers so that we always will be able to do this. Um, and we know the kind of movies we want to make. We were sort of, we felt like they were eclectic, but we kind of knew them when we saw them. And again, it goes back to what I said: provocative, entertaining, original. Um, so all of that, and then how have we stayed in business so long? I think we've stayed small. Um, we know how to pivot quickly. We've seen a lot of disruption in our industry. Obviously, we're going through a giant disruption right now, but we've been through other big ones too. I mean, the shift from film to digital. The DVDs vanishing kind of overnight. The writers' strike, just to name a few. Um, and I think we've always tried to, hold on to this idea that out of disruption comes opportunity, and don't fear change. I think that's like as you get older, as I get older, I can see even some of my peers. You really have to work hard not to be afraid of change.
Hmm.
And in fact, you should embrace it. And the business changes and shifts, and that's just the way it is. And don't be nostalgic for what used to be. I mean, it's great to love, celluloid, but that genie's out of the bottle. We're not, with some exceptions, we're not really going to be shooting celluloid the way we did.
Yeah, that's funny. A question I was going to ask you later, but I was watching some interviews with you, and in Cannes, of all places, you said, like it was a few years ago, but you were like, filmmakers should be called storytellers. And I've also heard you call us content creators. So I guess that goes in line with that. It's like running with the times.
Well, I mean, especially right now, and again, everybody will say, and they're not wrong, especially in the marketing and distribution business, look, everything that has happened to content during the pandemic was going to happen anyway. It just happened fast.
Yeah.
So I think what happened at a very accelerated pace is, we essentially lost theatrical, but I do believe it'll come back, and in a funny way. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. But I think what's happened too is the sort of distinction of what's content for streaming, what's a Netflix film as opposed to a film that you see in the theater that you could only see in the theater, and why was that decision made? And what about a mini series or a television show? Like, what's the difference? like when I've said, you know, my daughter is 21 years old, and I've said to her before when she tells me you know, I'm a little better trained now, but she'll tell me she loves some show, and I'll say without thinking, what night is it on? And she's like, what? Like, it's
What are you
on when I
talking
say
about?
it's on, you know? So there's definitely, like, if you put all of that in the stew, making those kind of distinctions becomes more difficult. Now, a lot of filmmakers have said to me, please stop calling me a content creator. I hate it. So, okay, I don't know why there's such an aversion to that word, but I'm fine with storytelling. I just think the distinctions are getting a little hard to really kind of, you know, separate. But what I was going to say is I had an extraordinary experience in September, which is against all odds. I flew to Venice, Italy, and participated at the Venice Film Festival as a juror. I wasn't a juror on the main competition because I had a movie in the main competition, but I was a juror on the Orizzonti, which was the, you know, the more experimental, younger, etc. So after not having seen any movies in a theater since the previous March, I watched 20 in about 10 days.
Nice. Good job.
And it was an extraordinary experience. It feels like stolen time. I'm kind of like, how did we get away with that?
Yeah.
But what I really took away from it was a renewed respect for what theatrical filmmaking is. And it's just clear to me now that there are movies that simply need to be seen theatrically to cast their spell. And it's a very different, and of course, look, you don't have to be a genius to know that it's a different experience when you're watching it, you know, on a screen you control. So you can be like, oh, okay, you know, I'm going to pause and, you know, go refill my wine glass, or, you know, this didn't grab me in the first 5 minutes, so I'm going to go on to something else, right? This is boring. Yeah. Whereas in a theater, you've made a commitment, and it's just like, it's a commitment that, like, you know, usually you have to honor. So it's a very different, it's like a different contract between the content and the viewer. And I realize now how much some movies really depend on that.
Right. That sounds awesome. I'm excited for festivals, hopefully to return offline one day. Okay, that's great. I want to get back to just kind of like the craft of it all, of producing, and specifically. So often producers, you know, are called, they support a director's vision, or they share the vision with the director. But I'd love to hear, what do you do, or what advice can you share when a director on set is getting out of control or losing control, or your visions are no longer aligned? Do you have any thoughts you can share?
I mean, the biggest, you know, thought really is, make sure before you know, take that walk down the aisle together, that you are making the same movie. I mean, I say that about directors and producers, but I also say that about producers and financiers, directors and financiers, because the worst problems I've ever seen happen have grown out of that. That the financier thinks they're getting one movie and feels completely hoodwinked when they see that they're actually getting a very different movie. You know, so that's, if a director is out of control, I feel like we've become savvy enough just through experience that I can identify that director now.
Yeah.
And I stay away.
Yeah.
You know, the few times it's happened to us, and it has, it's been horrific. You know, it's just like, and one of the directors, I won't name the movie or the director, apologized to me like a good 10 years later. And I was like, you know what? I don't know if I'm still ready to like, it's like, it was just too
Over it.
experience.
Ugh.
I'm sorry,
That's,
so, but so far, knock wood, we've been able to avoid that.
that's good. I have not encountered that myself, and I not yet, but I hope I don't. On that, I mean, I'm a producer too, and producing is hard, specifically independent producing. It's a miracle sometimes that anything gets made. Are there any other like lessons, now that you can look back in hindsight, to share?
With producers,
Yeah.
I'm not so great at hindsight. I think there's a certain temperament that it takes to be a producer, and not everyone has it. I think it demands certain fearlessness, a certain ability perhaps to really compartmentalize so that you're not like, kept up all night about the fact that, your financing is falling apart or what have you. I think partners really helped me. And it just like, it helps to, to spread the stress and the burden, etc. So, I guess those are my main points.
Yeah. Fair. Yeah. Partners, just the moral support sometimes.
Totally.
And was there a turning point? I guess you said the turning point was when you guys had those 3 films in the same office that allowed you to form Killer and develop things. Yeah. But like, did things start getting easier at a certain point? Are they still hard right now?
Again, it's sort of like, it's like that French proverb, the more things change, the more they stay the same. What's easier is, again, we just have so much experience. So I can call an agent and be taken seriously when I say, I want to, can Brad Pitt look at this script or what have you. So that's easier. Some of the filmmakers we work with have, gained awards attention, which makes it easier for them to get their movies financed, which makes it easier for us. So there was that. There's certain financiers that I can just call and get on the phone and all of that. But trying to make truly original visions continues to be a challenge, but it's a challenge we chose. There's enough of a mix, I think, now of things that are super tough to get made and perhaps a little less tough, that what we have to do every year is sort of say, okay, we really have room, psychically and logistically for one really tough one. So which one is it going to be? Because it's a first-time director, because it's subject matter that's really difficult, etc.
Right, that makes sense. So how many projects do you have in production in an average year or any given year?
I mean, often as many as 4 or 5. Right. This year, I guess if we count this year, meaning last year, 2021. Well, no, I mean 2020. Sorry. We shot a miniseries for Netflix that was shut down in March, and then we started shooting again this past October. We were working on a series for FX about the history of LGBTQ rights in America. We were finishing the movie that went to Venice, The World to Come, Mona Fostwald's movie.
Right.
And we were finishing Todd Haynes's documentary about the Velvet Underground.
Right.
So if the pandemic hadn't happened, I'm pretty sure we would have had at least a movie shooting over the summer,
Mhm.
or to the fall. So,
And so what does now when you're producing and you have what does a day look like for you? Are you on set most of the time? Like what's your jam?
I mean, when we're shooting, I'm on set. I was on set for Halston, the Netflix series that we, picked up again in October. I mean, I think set is going to look very different for a long time, which is, another thing I think we're all kind of grappling with. Um, but I was there in my N95 and face shield and goggles. Um, so yeah, I mean, Pam and I split it up. We until recently had a third partner, David Hinojosa, who we're still working with on other things. And between the three of us, somebody was usually on set all the time.
Mhm.
Um, and then, I spend a lot of my day, during the pandemic, kind of, I guess, doing what I do anyway, except on Zoom,
Yeah.
pitching, reading, watching people's movies, watching people's shorts, um, uh, having meet and greets with actors, meet and greets with, new
Right.
directors, etc.
Right on. Um, yeah, so I guess you're not ADing your features anymore, which is good. Um, so you are shooting 8 or 9 movies a year. I mean, I
Not
hear
8
this about
or 9. I would say more like
I
4
mean,
or 5.
4 or 5, sorry.
Yeah.
And do you struggle with like a work-life balance? I mean, we hear that from producers a lot. It's like, do you get up at 4 a.m.? Do you like you have so many things that you do. How do you have boundaries? Like, do you, or is it all work just so easily?
I mean, I feel like that was harder in my 30s. As I get older, also having a child helped me sort of balance things out a little bit
Right.
because, you know, at a certain point, sometimes you have to decide, like, am I gonna be here or not?
Mhm.
Um, so I feel like now again, because Pam and I run the company with the way we want to, it's kind of organic. It's like we want to spend the evenings not working, but sometimes it's just like that call from LA that comes at 9 o'clock at night and you just have to take it. Or, a director is having a meltdown over something, or there's some really sensitive actor issues. So you're like, all right, I'll take I'm going to have to work later tonight than I want to. That said, we're also like, you know what? I feel like taking Friday off, and
Yeah.
we have our, it's. I feel like we're as effective as we've always been, but we are able to sort of modulate our time to fit organically with the work we're doing.
That's great. That's encouraging for the producers that are still like trying to manage that. It's challenging. Um, so are there ever have you ever felt like throwing in the hat or giving it all up? Like what keeps you going when you feel like that?
I mean, I don't really know what else I do.
Yeah.
I do run an MFA program for SUNY Stony Brook
Hmm.
here in Manhattan. And, I do really love speaking to, people who are starting out or who are enthusiastic about entering the world of filmmaking or storytelling, content creation. And in some ways doing that and also working with first-time directors makes it so that I'm not cynical.
Right.
And
That's good.
and I do think cynicism is it's a difficult thing to overcome in this business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've not you speak at so many you've spoken at so many institutions and so many film festivals and I've read that you teach. How it must be important for you do you have like things you want to impart onto like new filmmakers, content creators?
I mean, it's that. It's also just this sense of like, when I came into the business, there weren't very many people like me, meaning, you know, women, queer, but also not from a wealthy family. And, you know, and this sense, you know, it was this pervasive sense in the film business for a long time that you had to start by working for free. And that just wasn't available to everybody. And I also saw how many women, you know, were not just, you know, there wasn't just, you know, we talk about the dearth of female directors, although it was pretty great to see Chloe Zhao win last night, Nomadland. So we talk about the dearth of women directors, and but we don't talk enough, I think, about other places where they're underrepresented in cinema, like, you know, behind the camera. And I really felt when I was, you know, those first sets I was on were such boys clubs, and it was really, it was tough. So, and again, you know, I don't just teach women, but I do love that I can represent and say, look, I did it.
Yep. You did it from the ground up too, which is, yeah, very encouraging. And what do you, I mean, so I've asked, like, what do you do when you feel like you give up? But what do you love about it? Has that kind of changed, or what, you know, what was it that made you want to do this? And,
you know, at the beginning, there was something really extraordinary. A lot of our early movies were, you know, queer in content and in construction, and at the time, there was so little content for LGBTQ people that any representation at all they would flock to.
right.
So it was kind of amazing to really realize that if you made a movie for the right amount of money, and it was absolutely queer in content, and you marketed it just to a queer audience, if they showed up, you'd make your money back.
Right.
And that was incredibly empowering. And I remember when Poison went to the Angelica, it broke records, and those records weren't, you know, broken again for many years. And look, Poison is a very experimental movie, and there were a lot of people who walked out of the Angelica scratching their heads and saying, like, you know, I just wanted to see some boys kissing. Like, what was all that? You know? But it was really, you know, that was really something. And being able to bring stories to people who had never seen themselves on screen or rarely had, you know, was really, that was a big deal. And it still is. I mean, I still, you know, I tell this story a lot, but it's true. I do get stopped on the street like once a month, probably a little bit more rarely now since, you know, none of us can recognize each other in the masks, you know. But I get stopped on the street a lot by people who say to me, you made my favorite movie. And I never know what movie they're going to say. You know, like sometimes it's Hedwig, sometimes it's The Gray Zone, sometimes it's Far From Heaven. And the fact, if you can make movies that people can say, can designate as something they want to watch again and again, then that's pretty great.
That is pretty great. And so, I mean, it's a hard question to answer, but I assume, but what excites you about a project now? Because when you started, there weren't a lot of these films on screen, and now you've, you know, changed that. So what?
You know, we have to assess films in some ways by something that's a little hard to sort of put your fingers on, but their makeability, you know, and that's a combo of the actors, the script. Is the story zeitgeisty? Is there something about it that feels, you know, of the moment? You know, who's the director? What have they done before? is there just something in the whole alchemy of it coming together that feels exciting and new? And
Mhm.
you know, again, I sort of know it when I see it. I also know it
Yeah.
when I don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and this is another question. I think it's like hard to answer, but how do you, I think it's a case by case thing, but how do you define, the success of one of your films, or, what, because obviously Hollywood, it's like a box office thing is a big thing, but for your films, how do you
Um,
consider them successful?
you know, that sort of depends on the film. If it's a brand new filmmaker, often simply getting the movie, well, all right, first and foremost, the real measure of success is if nobody loses money, you
Yeah.
know. And I know it's a little different in other countries because of film subsidies, et cetera, but here that's a big part of it. Um, but then it's like for a first time filmmaker's movie to get into Sundance, that's a success. You know, for that same movie to make a distribution sale, even if it's a modest one, that's a success. Um, for a movie to be very, very well reviewed is also a success. It's just it's and then sometimes you make a movie and for whatever reason, and a good example of this is Safe. Safe is, revered now as, one of Todd Haynes' best films. Um, but when it came out, audiences and critics didn't really know what to do with it.
Right.
And, it kind of fell a little bit with a thud.
Mhm.
And I'd worked, it was a very hard film to get financed. We'd worked extraordinarily hard on it, and I was heartbroken.
Mm.
But then, time went by and people sort of, it was right around, DVDs and VHS, and you could start to rediscover movies on your own terms.
Right.
And by the end of the 90s, the Village Voice did a poll of all the critics, I think in America, for what was the best movie of the 90s, and it was Safe. So, so it just was, sometimes movies have to find their time.
Yeah. There's an interview I watched where you described producing as a misunderstood profession. Can you tell me a little bit what you mean?
I think I probably have covered this a bit. I mean, I think what I meant really is no one really knows what the hell we do.
Yeah.
So, for better or worse.
Yeah.
And it's also, as I said, it's just there's so many ways that people can get producer credits. There's no like clear path, that it also just kind of makes everything a little confusing.
Yeah. Fair. Here in Canada, I mean, I'm sure this is everywhere, but when producers are starting out, it's hard to sustain themselves, sustain a living, like you defer your fees, etc. And in Canada, especially, sometimes we don't make our money back.
Right.
Do you have any advice, or like on things to do, how to boundaries to create, or just something you wish you knew back then?
It's a tough one. I mean, producers' work is often devalued. They're often the first ones expected to give up their fee, in order to, get a movie to the finish line faster. I don't know. I mean, sustainability, I don't know what the answer is. I guess, partnerships, diversifying what you do, the different types of producing that you do. But I don't, it's an ongoing problem and I wish I had a solution.
Yeah. Well, I think like what you've been saying about embracing change, you
Right.
know, and kind of rolling with the punches is a little bit like that as well.
Right.
Um, so you say you still pitch. I mean, I feel like some people assume once you have a certain amount of success, you don't pitch
No.
anymore.
No, we
Do you have
pitch.
any? Do you have any horror stories of pitching?
If I have any horror stories, I mean, the horror story is you think it's not so much you pitched and it was a bad room and they didn't buy it. Actually, the worst thing is when you pitch and you think you did really well and they don't buy it.
Mhm.
And they were responsive and it was all like, it felt, really right in the room, and then they just didn't buy it.
Yeah.
So, but I have a fairly thick skin. I certainly allow myself to get upset about, what I perceive as small-mindedness, or, especially, when you pitch something that may have a queer theme, or, a Latina theme, or an African American theme, and the response is, well, we already have one of those, and it's like,
Yeah.
you can't have more than one. So,
Yeah.
So that can be really frustrating.
Yeah. Is there any like, do you feel like there's common mistakes young producers make, or that you can think of when either thinking about pitching or just like embarking on their first projects?
I think the big mistake, when I speak at events like this, a lot of times the question I get asked is, how do I get my script to you? And it's like, you're not gonna. That's
Yeah.
just not how it works. But there's ways. There are people. It's more important to start at the bottom of a company than at the top, because if you start at the top, people are very surrounded by gatekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
But if you start at the bottom, then it's like, it's people probably maybe around your age or experience level. They're actively looking to connect with people like you. And how do you do that? Well, film festivals, online communities. There have been, if an intern who's, we have interns mostly from, who are mostly still in college, but if they tell me that they read something they really liked, I'll pay attention,
Good.
So it's just ways, get in the world, but,
Mm-hmm.
Waiting for me outside of a bathroom is not going to win any points. And that has happened.
That's happened? Oh my God. I mean, I a lot of people are talking about this now, but I'm just curious, how hard has the pandemic been, like, in terms of shooting in the pandemic? How much of a pain in the ass is it?
Well, that's been, that has been very, very difficult. I mean, we were very lucky that our production of Halston suffered relatively little impact from the pandemic in terms of shutting down. Tremendous impact in terms of how we thought about what we were going to shoot, the number of people allowed on set. In some ways, the I think the glass half full version is, I think, directors did like that there were fewer people surrounding them on set. And it also forced like a focus, like we're just gonna, this is, it was very hard to chit chat. It was very hard to like do anything except focus on like exactly the task at hand. So there was that, the level of gear that we all had to wear. I feel like when we had trouble hearing each other, wearing a face shield in the rain is just insane. When the director wanted to make sure I understood what he was saying, he would literally come like right here and yell through his mask into my ear, which of course makes you think like so socially it's like
What's the point?
So, but it was the only way we could understand each other, you know? And so all of that was really hard. Again, I'm very grateful that, we had with one episode with a false positive, not our lead actor, but an actor who was, in a fair amount of one of our episodes. And what I really remember about that is less how it upended our schedule, but how that poor guy, the poor actor, his life was upended for, the 3 or 4 hours that it took to make sure that he in fact was negative. And I don't know what it's going to look like going forward. I mean, I think there's going to be some version, hopefully not as stringent as, what we went through. I'm hoping, it'll be a little bit more open to have, more extras, more, not so much fear around intimate scenes, and maybe relaxing the gear a tiny bit. I don't know though, that's above my pay grade.
Yes, I guess the vaccine rollout, how that goes down and how that works will be interesting to see. It's difficult for the little tiny movies too. It's very difficult.
Well, for the tiny movies, it's impossible. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, we were working with Netflix, who I have to say really did everything they possibly could to keep crews as safe as possible. But if you're like a $2 million feature, like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, I'm shooting a $1 million feature in a couple months, and that's exactly the question I face. But yeah, I feel like there'll be light at the end of the tunnel.
I hope so.
Yeah. And so I'm sure you have a bunch of projects. I mean, I know some of your projects from last year maybe haven't seen light yet, but what anything you were working on that you want to share?
Well, it's been announced already that Todd Haynes is working on a movie about Peggy Lee, that Michelle Williams will be playing the lead in. We're working with Billy Porter on a movie called What If with Orion, and that we're actually, just starting not pre-production, but pre-production.
Right.
Really just waiting for Billy to be done with Pose. So those are the two coming up that I'm very excited about.
Awesome. And do you know when, I mean, I don't know if it's something you want to talk about, but I'm curious, when is Lola seeing the light? Do you know?
Zola.
Sorry.
Right now we're talking about June 30th.
Excellent. And is holding on to a theatrical for Zola?
Moment.
Yeah. You're referencing like Boys Don't Cry, for example, as a film that, you worked on for 7 years before you shot.
Right.
And I mean, that was back in the late 90s, I guess, or early 90s, I guess, when you took it on. And was Kimberly Pierce attached the whole time?
Oh, yeah. It was her. She had done
she did the short.
A short about the subject. And when she came to see me for the first time, she owed too much money to the film lab to actually be able to get it out. And so I think I paid the bill so that I could see it. And then we just started talking to her about what she wanted to do. And one of the big transformations that project took was Hillary had originally written it really with different names, changed details, etc. But while we were working with her, she actually went back to Nebraska, attended the trials, and it just became clearer and clearer that this should just be about the people it was supposed to be about.
Right. Yeah, I loved Boys Don't Cry. It was like a film that led me to read all your books. And as I was in film school, a question I love to ask, but any films, TV you watched recently, any content that you especially loved or moved you, or anything you want to share?
Look, I really loved Nomadland. I watch a lot of like British crime miniseries. Obviously Broadchurch and things, but other things like that. I watched Pen 15 recently, and I really dug that. just finished watching Your Honor. I do the Housewives, but I only do New York and Los Angeles, or Beverly Hills, I should say. What else? We've been going through a sort of 70s movies while we're also watching all the Oscar movies. But so I watched Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore the other night. So all kinds of things.
Cool. Yeah, there's so much out there, but I go back and forth between wanting to be entertained and wanting to watch, great films or
Right.
great television.
Well,
I mean, not that you can't be both, but
exactly.
yeah. And so tell me about so Poison won at Sundance, right? And you've won Oscars throughout your career. Like, can you just talk about how that kind of visibility or how those moments affected, if you can remember?
Look, Poison was the first movie I brought to Sundance, and it won the grand jury prize. And I was like, how hard can this be? And we didn't win it again. We won it a couple years ago for a documentary that we were executive producers on, and that was like the first time after since then. I think when you get to go on the awards ride, it's really special, and it doesn't happen very often. And it's really like, you pour your heart into a movie, and then all the stars have to align. The critics have to respond, audiences have to respond, and it all has to line up in this like perfect sort of, diamond for you to be one of those anointed films. And whenever it happens to us, and it's happened a few times, we really appreciate it. We're like, we know that this is a rare and special thing. So, look, I hope it happens to us again. I don't think about it that much. I don't focus on it because you'll make yourself crazy. But again, when it happens, it's a gift.
Yeah, I bet. How are your kind of roles different when you EP from when you produce?
When we EP, it's usually to perform a fairly specific function, like help, if it's a young producer, help them get the doors open at the agencies to get cast, or help assure the financiers that there's adults in the room. That's usually, and we talk out very specifically what expectations are when we're going to, get on a film or a TV series for that matter. Like what can we bring to the table that is value added?
Yeah, I mean, I think producing is misunderstood because they think we're earning money or I don't know, doing things like that. But yeah, I appreciate you, like thinking of the producer as a big part of the storytelling process in that way. So is there anything else you'd like to share?
Not really. I mean, I hope next time I can attend in person.
That would be lovely.
And I really had a great time the last time I was there. Good luck, everybody.
Yes. Well, please come visit us again when we're not that far from each other, when we're allowed to let people in.